There are things you haven't said, not because you don't know how, not because the words aren't there. You know exactly what you'd say if you said it. You've had the conversation 100 times in your head, fully formed, every sentence, every pause, the exact way it would come out if you finally let it. You've rehearsed it so many times it almost feels like you already had it. You didn't. You kept it in, and it's still there. Everything you didn't say. To the person who hurt you, to the person you loved, to the people who needed to hear it and didn't, to the version of yourself you've been meaning to be honest with for longer than you want to admit. All of it sitting inside you waiting. That silence has weight. I think you know that. You've been feeling the weight of it for a while. The way it makes certain things feel heavier than they should. The way it creates a specific kind of fatigue that isn't about sleep. The fatigue of holding something that was never meant to be held this long. The silence is killing you, not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly in the specific ways that unexpressed things do damage. In the relationships it's distorted, the distance it's created, the version of yourself it's been slowly sealing off from the world. That's what I want to talk about. What you're keeping, why you're keeping it, and what it's actually costing you. Let me start with the silence inside relationships, because I think that's where the most damage accumulates and where people are least willing to look honestly. You're in something, or you were, and there are things that have been unsaid between you for so long they've started to feel like part of the structure. The resentment you never named, the need you never asked for, the way something they did 6 months ago is still in you, still affecting how you show up, still putting a slight distance between you that neither of you has ever directly addressed. You didn't say it when it happened because the moment felt wrong, or you didn't want to make a thing of it, or you weren't sure if you were being too sensitive, or you'd already had a hard week and one more difficult conversation felt like too much. So you filed it, and then something else happened and you filed that too, and then something else. And slowly, without either of you making any dramatic choices, the relationship developed this whole invisible layer, a sediment of unspoken things that both of you can feel, but neither of you is directly addressing, and it changes everything. The way conversations are slightly careful now, the way certain topics get quietly avoided, the way you can be in the same room and feel like you're not quite reaching each other, the way something that should feel close feels lately like there's a glass between you. That glass is the silence. That's what it builds over time. Not from one big thing usually, from the accumulation of small things that never got said. And the longer it's there, the harder it becomes to address. Because now it's not one conversation, it's a year of conversation that didn't happen. And opening that up feels enormous. Feels like starting something that might not have a good ending. So you keep not saying it, and the glass gets thicker. I want to talk about the silence that lives in you specifically, not about a relationship, about your own internal experience that you haven't been expressing to anyone. Because some of what you're not saying isn't directed at a specific person. It's just things you know about yourself that you haven't said out loud to anyone. Things you feel that you've never found the right words for or the right person to say them to. Things you've been carrying privately for so long that the privacy itself has started to feel permanent. Like this is just information that lives inside you and doesn't need to go anywhere else. But it does need to go somewhere. Not because you owe anyone your inner life. You don't. But because the things we never express, the feelings we never name out loud, the truths we never say to a single living person, they don't dissipate from lack of expression. They calcify. They harden into something denser and less accessible. They become harder to move the longer they stay still. And there's something about having an experience that has never been witnessed, that has never been received by another person, that has only ever existed inside your own head. Something fundamentally isolating about it, in a way that adds to the loneliness, even if you can't fully explain the connection. You were not designed to be your own only witness. No one is. The things inside you that have never been spoken, they're waiting for air. They're waiting for a listener. They're waiting for the specific relief that only comes from saying the true thing out loud and having another person receive it. That relief is real. It's not weakness to need it. Here's what the silence does to the body. Because we stay too much in the psychological description and not enough in the physical reality of what holding things costs. The body doesn't distinguish between emotional suppression and physical tension. When you hold something back, when the thing wants to come out and you keep it in, the body registers that as effort, as strain. Your muscles hold it, your chest holds it, your jaw and your shoulders and the back of your neck hold the things you haven't said in ways you can feel. When you finally stop moving and get still enough to notice, that tension accumulates. Over days, over months, over years of not saying things. It becomes baseline. You stop noticing it because it's always there. But it's doing damage that is as real as any physical injury, just slower and less visible. And then there's what happens to your nervous system. Unexpressed emotion doesn't disappear. It gets stored. in the body, in the nervous system, in the specific ways you react to things that remind you of the unsaid thing even when the connection isn't obvious, a tone of voice that sounds like theirs, a situation that rhymes with the one you never processed. Your nervous system responds to the echo before your conscious mind has even registered what happened. You're being run by things you never finished with, things that needed expression and resolution and didn't get it, and your body is still carrying them, still trying to complete a process that got interrupted, still waiting for the thing to be said so it can finally be let go. Let me talk about the specific silence of not asking for what you need, because I think this is where a lot of people live and very few people want to admit it. You know what you need, or at least you have a sense of it, a specific, real thing that would help, that you haven't been getting, that you've been managing without, that you keep hoping will somehow arrive without you having to ask for it directly. Maybe it's someone checking on you without being prompted. Maybe it's being listened to without advice being offered immediately. Maybe it's physical presence or a specific kind of support, or just having someone sit with you in the hard thing instead of trying to fix it. Whatever it is, you know what it is. You've known for a while, and you haven't asked. Not because you don't trust the person you'd ask. Not necessarily. More often because asking feels like an imposition, because needing things feels like being difficult, because somewhere in your history you learned that your needs were too much, that having them made you a burden, that asking created problems, that the safer and more acceptable version of yourself was the one who didn't need things. So you manage. You take care of yourself in the ways you can, and you go without in the ways you can't, and you tell yourself you're fine when what you actually are is quietly starving for something specific that you keep not letting anyone give you, and the relationship, whatever relationship it is, suffers for it because you're not fully in it. You're in the managed needs suppressed version of it, the version where you're being low maintenance while slowly becoming someone who is deeply, invisibly dissatisfied. That's not sustainable, and it's not honest. And the person on the other side of it is probably sensing that something is off without being able to name what, and adjusting in ways that make the gap wider instead of smaller. All because you never asked for the specific thing you needed. There's a silence that's about the past, and I want to name it because I think it's one of the heaviest kinds and one of the least addressed. Things that happened that you never got to fully speak. Experiences that were real and significant and that shaped you in ways that still show up in your current life, in your relationships, in your responses, in the specific places where you flinch or shut down or react in ways that don't fully match the situation. Experiences that needed to be processed aloud with a witness and weren't, or were partially but not fully, or were dismissed before they were finished, or were so large that no single conversation was going to be enough to hold them. Those things don't resolve because you've moved on from them chronologically. They resolve when they're fully expressed, when they've been said completely enough, heard completely enough that the part of you still living in them can finally understand that they're over, that they belong to the past now, that you can move forward without them following. Until then, they come with you into every new relationship, every new dynamic, every new person who ends up triggering the old thing, because the old thing is still live inside you, still waiting for its expression, still trying to complete itself in the only way unfinished things know how, by finding echoes of the original situation in the present and replaying it. You can't outrun it. You can't distract yourself past it. You can only go through it, and going through it means eventually speaking it to someone in some form, enough times and in enough ways that it finally gets to be finished. That's not a one-time fix, it's a process, but it starts with the first time you say the thing you've never said. I want to talk about what happens in the space between people when the silence has been there too long, because I think this is the most painful version of it. Not what the silence does to you internally, but what it does to the relationship. Two people who have things they're not saying to each other develop a specific quality of distance. Not unfriendly distance, just careful, a quality of navigation, of knowing where the unspoken things are and moving around them without touching them, of having learned through experience or instinct which areas are mined and which are safe. And the relationship starts to shrink to the safe areas. The conversations stay at the surface level, the depth that used to be available in those early days when everything was being said for the first time, when it was all new and there were no minds yet. That depth has been crowded out by all the things that never got addressed, and you both feel it. The shrinkage, the careful navigation, the sense that something is being managed between you without either of you having explicitly agreed to manage it, and neither of you says so, because naming it would require opening the very thing you've both been working so carefully around. So the relationship continues, and it's fine. It functions. People from the outside can't see anything wrong. But you both probably know that it used to be more than this. It used to go somewhere real, and somewhere along the way it stopped going there and started going around. That's what the silence builds. Not just distance, a smaller version of something that was supposed to be larger. So what do you do with all of this? with the things that have been sitting in the silence. You say them. That's the beginning and the middle and the end of it. You find a way to say them. Not perfectly, not with everything worked out in advance, not when the moment is perfectly right and the conditions are ideal, and you figured out exactly how to phrase it. Those conditions don't arrive. You say it before you're ready in the moment that's close enough to ready. You say the thing to the person who needs to hear it, or you say it to someone safe if the direct recipient isn't available or safe or still in your life. You write it down and then read it aloud to yourself in an empty room if that's what it takes. You find some way to get it out of the inside of you and into the air where it can finally be a finished thing instead of a permanent pending one. Because here's what I know about the things we keep in silence. They never get smaller from being kept. They only get smaller from being expressed. The thing that feels enormous and unsayable inside you, the thing you've been holding for months or years, it almost always gets smaller the moment it's out. Not gone, but smaller, more manageable. Something you're dealing with rather than something that's dealing with you. And the relationship that's been navigating around the silence, that relationship often becomes something more again when someone finally says the thing. Not always. Sometimes the thing, once said, confirms that the relationship is over, but even that is better than the indefinite managed distance of the unspoken. At least then, you know what you're dealing with. At least the thing is real and visible and can be addressed rather than quietly distorting everything from underneath. The silence has been protecting you from something. Risk, mostly. The risk of saying the true thing and having it not land the way you needed. The risk of asking for what you need and not getting it. The risk of being fully known and having that knowledge change how someone sees you. Those risks are real. I'm not pretending they aren't. But here is what is also real. The silence isn't safe. It feels safe because it's familiar, because it avoids the immediate discomfort of the honest conversation. But it is doing damage every day it continues. Slow, invisible, cumulative damage to your relationships, your body, your ability to feel fully present in your own life. The silence was never actually protecting you. It was just postponing a conversation you were always going to have eventually. You have things to say. Say them. To the right people in the right ways. With as much courage as you can pull together on the day you finally decide to pull it together. Not because it will be easy. It won't be easy. The first time you say a true thing you've been holding for a long time, it will feel enormous and terrifying and like too much. Say it anyway. Because the version of you that's been living in the silence, quiet, managed, careful, holding all of this in, that version is exhausted. That version has been doing a job it was never designed to do for longer than it should have had to. Let it rest. Say the thing, let it out. Let whatever happens next happen. That's the only way the silence stops killing you, and it's been killing you long enough. I don't think I noticed when it changed. That's the thing about this particular kind of loss. It doesn't arrive with a timestamp. There's no moment you can point to and say, there, that's where it shifted. It's more like you wake up one day and reach for something that used to be warm and find that it's just room temperature now. And you try to remember when it cooled and you can't. You weren't watching, you were inside it, you were living your life. And now you're standing in the middle of something that looks exactly like what you had before and feels completely different. And you don't know what to do with that because nothing technically happened. Nothing broke. Nothing ended. It just changed. Quietly, without asking your permission, without giving you any warning at all. That's what I want to talk about. Not the dramatic end of love, not the betrayal or the blow up or the relationship that crashes and burns in a way you can at least narrate. The other thing, the slower thing, the thing where love just becomes something else, something you recognize but can't quite feel the same way anymore. There's a specific version of the beginning of love that I think we spend a long time chasing without realizing that's what we're doing. You know the one, where everything about the other person is interesting, where you want to know every single thing about them, not because you're trying to assess them as a partner, not because you're running through a checklist, but because the information itself is fascinating, because it's them. Because every detail adds to this picture you're building and the picture keeps getting better, where you think about them in between seeing them, not anxiously, not the worried, overthinking kind of thinking, just the warm kind, the kind where they drift into your head while you're doing something else and it makes whatever you're doing a little lighter, where physical closeness feels like relief, where being in the same room as them is just better than being in a room without them, where you reach for them automatically without thinking, because reaching for them is just what your body does now. I'm not being naive about it. I know that phase doesn't last forever. I know it's not meant to. I know that what comes after it, the familiarity, the depth, the specific comfort of being truly known over time, is supposed to be richer, more real, more sustainable. I know all of that. But I also think something important lives in that early feeling that can get lost in the transition. And when it gets lost, when you notice it's gone and you can't find where you left it, it's one of the more disorienting experiences a person can have. Because you still love them. You're sure of that. You're almost certain. But the love feels different now, and you don't know if different means deeper, or if different means diminished, or if different means something is wrong, or if this is just what love becomes, and you're supposed to be fine with it. And you don't want to say that out loud. Because saying it out loud makes it real. Because saying it out loud means you might have to do something about it. Because saying it out loud to the person you love means watching their face change in a way you can't take back. So you keep it in, and you try to figure out if what you're feeling is a truth or just a season. Let me try to describe what it actually feels like, the texture of it, because I think the experience is specific enough that it deserves specificity. It feels like going through the motions of something you used to do naturally, like the actions are all the same, the morning texts, the inside jokes, the way you find each other at the end of the day, but they're running on memory now instead of impulse. You're doing them because you've always done them, because they're part of the structure of this, because stopping would mean something. It feels like looking at photographs from a year ago and being genuinely moved by them, by what you see in both of your faces, by the obvious realness of what was there. And then looking up from the photographs and trying to locate that same thing in the room you're currently in, and finding something quieter, something steadier, but not the same thing. It feels like effort where there wasn't effort before. Not bad effort, not the effort of fighting or managing or holding something damaged together, just the low-grade effort of being engaged, of being present, of generating warmth rather than just feeling it. And you wonder, is this normal? Is this what they mean when they say love is a choice? Is this what mature love actually looks like, and I've just been comparing it to the beginning, which is an unfair comparison which everyone says you shouldn't make? Or is this something else? Is this the feeling of something that's quietly been running out? Here's what I think happens, and I want to be careful here because I'm not sure I have it fully figured out. I think love changes for a lot of reasons, and not all of them are bad. Time changes it. Comfort changes it. The way two people settle into each other changes it. The urgency softens, the novelty fades, the constant low-level electricity of early love, which is genuinely not sustainable and would burn you out, becomes something calmer. That's not death, that's development. That's the thing actually taking root instead of just flowering. But I also think love can change because something went unaddressed, because two people drifted in a direction nobody named, because small resentments accumulated without being resolved, because one person changed and the other person didn't fully notice, or noticed and didn't know how to talk about it, because the communication that would have kept things close got replaced by the comfort that assumes closeness without checking. And those two things, natural development and quiet erosion, can feel almost identical from the inside, which is why it's so hard to know what you're dealing with, which is why people stay in things that have quietly stopped working for years, and also why people leave things that only needed a conversation. The feeling of distance doesn't tell you its own cause. You have to do that work yourself. I want to talk about the loneliness that lives inside this because I think it's one of the loneliest experiences there is, and it almost never gets named. You are with someone. You love them. You are committed to this, to them, to the life you've built together, and you are lonely. Not always, not completely, but in a real and specific way that you don't know how to explain to anyone, including them. You are lonely for the version of this that used to exist, for the version of them you fell in love with, which is not gone exactly, just harder to access. For the version of yourself that existed inside that early love, that felt so lit up by another person, that moved through the world with this specific lightness that came from being fully, recently chosen. You miss a feeling that technically hasn't ended. You grieve something that is still here, and you can't say that. Because if you say that to the person you're with, what you're saying is, I love you, but being with you used to feel better than this. And that is true and real and doesn't make you a bad person, but it will land like a wound, and you know it. So you carry it. You try to generate the feeling through action, through dates and gestures, and recreating the conditions of the early thing as if the early thing was a recipe you could follow. Sometimes that works for a night. Sometimes you catch a glimpse of it and it's enough to keep you going. Sometimes it doesn't work and you sit across from someone you've loved for years, feeling further away than the distance between your chairs. There are things that change love that we don't talk about honestly enough. Disappointment changes it. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The accumulated weight of small moments where they weren't who you needed them to be. The times you needed them to show up and they didn't. The conversations you tried to have that went nowhere. The ways they've let you see them clearly. And some of what you've seen has been harder to love than you expected. You still love them, but loving someone and being disappointed by them at the same time takes up space. And if the disappointment never gets addressed, if it just gets filed away, handled, moved past without really being resolved, it builds up somewhere, and it changes the texture of the love, makes it a little heavier to carry. Boredom changes it too, and I know that's uncomfortable to say, but I think it's true. Not boredom with the person necessarily, boredom with the shape of things, with the predictability, with knowing exactly how most conversations are going to go, how most evenings are going to end, what they're going to say about any given topic before they say it. That predictability is also comfort. It's also safety. It's also the thing people mean when they say they want a partner, and not just a feeling. But it can quietly drain something from the experience of being together if nobody tends to it. If you let the routine become the whole thing. And then there's change itself. People change. You've changed. They've changed. And sometimes two people change in directions that continue to align, and sometimes they change in directions that quietly diverge. And if you're not paying attention, if you're assuming alignment because that's how it used to be, you can find yourself standing next to someone who is genuinely different from the person you fell in love with without either of you having done anything wrong. I want to say something about the guilt, because I think people who feel this carry a disproportionate amount of guilt for something that isn't a moral failing. You didn't choose for love to feel different. You didn't decide one morning to care less, to feel less, to be less moved by the person you've committed yourself to. It didn't happen because you weren't trying hard enough or grateful enough or mature enough. Feelings don't work like that. You cannot effort your way into an emotion. You cannot guilt yourself into warmth. And yet most people who feel this spend enormous energy blaming themselves for it, telling themselves they're selfish, telling themselves a better person would just appreciate what they have, telling themselves that if they were more emotionally disciplined, more grateful, more adult about the whole thing, they wouldn't be standing here wondering where the feeling went. That's not fair, and it's also not useful. The guilt doesn't bring the feeling back. It just adds a layer of shame on top of an already uncomfortable truth. And shame makes you less likely to address the thing directly, because addressing it means admitting it, and admitting it means facing the shame you've been trying to outrun. So you end up in this place where you feel something true, feel guilty for feeling it, can't address it because the guilt is in the way, and the thing just continues. Let the guilt go, or at least set it down long enough to look at what's underneath it, because underneath it is just a person who loves someone and is trying to understand why something that used to feel one way feels different now. That's not a character flaw. That's just being human in a long relationship with another human who's also changing all the time. You're allowed to feel this and still be a good person. You're allowed to name this and still love them. You're allowed to be confused and uncertain and a little sad about the distance between now and then, without it meaning that everything is over. Give yourself that much. You've been carrying this long enough without that. So what do? I don't think there's a clean answer to that. I think it depends on what you're actually dealing with. Whether this is natural development or quiet erosion, whether the love has changed or the relationship has stopped tending the love, whether you've grown apart or just stopped checking in. But I do think the first thing is naming it, saying it somewhere, even if just to yourself first. Not dramatizing it, not catastrophizing it, just being honest about what you feel. Love feels different now. I don't know what that means yet. But it's true, and I'm not going to keep pretending it isn't, because the pretending is what makes it worse. The pretending is what lets the slow erosion continue unchecked. The pretending is how two people who once loved each other deeply and fully end up feeling like strangers sharing a space, both of them grieving something neither of them ever named. You owe it to yourself and to them to name it, not as an accusation, not as a verdict, just as information. As a real and honest thing that's happening inside you that the relationship deserves to know about. Because sometimes naming it is what brings it back. Sometimes the conversation you've been afraid to have is the thing that opens a door you thought had closed. Sometimes love that has quieted down is not love that has ended. It's love that stopped being tended and just needs someone to tend it again. And sometimes you name it and you find out that you've both been feeling it, that you've both been carrying this private grief about what used to exist. And somehow, impossibly, that shared grief becomes the beginning of something closer than what you had before, because you're finally actually in it together instead of separately managing the loss of it. That happens, it really does. But also, and I want to say this gently but clearly, sometimes love changing is love telling you something true. Sometimes the feeling shifted because the fit was never quite right, and the early love was too loud to let you hear that. Sometimes you've grown into a person who needs something different from what this can give. Sometimes the relationship has run the length of what it was, and holding on past to that point isn't loyalty. It's just fear of the loss, and that's a hard thing to know, and a harder thing to act on. And I'm not telling you what to do with it. I'm just saying the feeling is information. It's not a betrayal, and it's not a failure, and it doesn't make you a bad person or an ungrateful one. It's just honest. The most honest thing your heart knows how to do is feel what it actually feels. And if what it feels is that something has changed, then something has changed. The question is whether what's changed is a beginning or an ending. Only you know that. But you have to be willing to actually look. Love doesn't feel the same anymore. That sentence can mean a lot of different things. It can mean it deepened. It can mean it drifted. It can mean you stopped tending it. It can mean you grew. It can mean you grew apart. But it always means the same first thing. It means you're paying attention. It means you care enough to notice. It means you haven't gone numb or given up or stopped trying to understand what's happening inside you. That matters. Paying attention is actually the beginning of everything. Whatever this is, whatever the love becoming different actually means for you, at least you're not looking away. At least you're still asking the question. That's where everything worth having starts. Overthinking is killing you, not literally, but close enough that the word fits, because what overthinking actually does, what it does to your sleep, your relationships, your ability to just exist in a moment without immediately analyzing it to death, is a slow, quiet kind of damage. The kind that doesn't show up on anything. The kind nobody around you can see. The kind you can't even fully explain to someone who doesn't live inside it. You just know that your brain never stops, that there is no off switch, that the moment something happens, something good, something bad, something completely neutral, a part of you immediately picks it up and starts turning it over, looking for meaning, looking for threat, looking for the thing underneath the thing, and you're exhausted, not from your life, from your own head. That's what I want to talk about, not in an abstract way, in the specific, honest, this is actually what it does to you way that I think most people who overthink have never had fully named for them. Let me start with what it actually costs you, because I think we talk about overthinking like it's a personality quirk, like it's just how some people are wired and it's fine, it's manageable. Drink some chamomile tea and journal about it. It's not fine. It's costing you real things. It's costing you your present. Every moment you spend living inside a conversation that already happened or a scenario that hasn't happened yet is a moment you are not actually in your life. Not in the room, not with the people in front of you, not feeling what there is to feel right now. You're somewhere else in the past replaying something you can't change, or in the future preparing for something that might never arrive. And the present just keeps passing, quietly, without you in it. It's costing you your relationships because overthinking doesn't stay internal. It bleeds out. It changes how you communicate. You either over-explain because your brain has run every possible misinterpretation and you're trying to preempt all of them, or you go completely quiet because saying anything feels like opening a door you won't be able to close. It makes you pull back at exactly the moments you should be moving closer. It makes you read distance into things that aren't distant and miss the actual warning signs because you're too busy analyzing the fake ones. It's costing you your confidence. Every decision that should be simple becomes a referendum on your judgment. Every choice carries the weight of all the ways it could go wrong. And over time, all that second guessing teaches you that you can't be trusted, that your instincts are unreliable, that before you do anything you need to think it through one more time, just to be sure. One more time becomes the only time you ever operate, and you stop trusting yourself completely. Here's the part I want to name that doesn't get named enough. Overthinking feels productive. That's the trap. That's why it's so hard to stop. When you're running every scenario, when you're analyzing every angle, when you're preparing responses to conversations that haven't happened yet, it feels like you're doing something, like you're being responsible, thorough, like you're the kind of person who thinks things through instead of just reacting. But there's a difference between thinking something through and thinking it to death. Thinking something through has an endpoint. You gather the information, you consider the options, you make a call. Overthinking has no endpoint. It circles, it loops back, it generates new questions every time it answers one. It is thinking that has gotten detached from any useful destination and is now just running, because running is what it does. You're not solving anything, you're just spinning. And the spinning feels like work, so you keep doing it. And meanwhile, the actual thing, the decision, the conversation, the moment either passes or gets worse because you waited too long inside your own head to address it. And that's the cost. You prepare endlessly for a life you're not actually living. I want to talk about relationships specifically because I think that's where overthinking does its cruelest work. You meet someone, or you're already with someone, and something small happens. A text that's slightly shorter than usual, a tone that's slightly different, a moment where they seem somewhere else, something that a non-overthinking brain would register and file under. Probably nothing. Your brain does not file it under probably nothing. Your brain picks it up and immediately starts building. What did that mean? Why was it different? Is something wrong? Did I do something? Are they pulling away? Is this the beginning of the end? And within 20 minutes you have constructed an entire narrative, detailed, internally consistent, emotionally devastating, about something that was probably just them being tired. And now you're responding to that narrative instead of to reality. You're quieter with them because of the story your brain wrote. You're more careful, more guarded, slightly more distant. And they notice, and of course they notice, and they adjust to your adjustment. And now there actually is a slight distance between you. Not because anything was wrong, because your brain made something out of nothing and you responded to the something and created a version of the nothing that is now real. You worried the thing into existence. That happens more than you think. The distance you're always afraid of, the one you're constantly scanning for, sometimes you're the one creating it, not intentionally, not consciously, just by living inside the story your brain built instead of the reality that was actually there. There's something I want to say about the specific exhaustion of being an overthinker in a relationship with someone who isn't, because the gap between those two processing styles is genuinely one of the hardest things to bridge. You bring something up, gently, carefully, after having thought about how to phrase it for 3 days, and they look at you and say something like, "I don't know, I wasn't really thinking anything by it," and they mean it. They genuinely weren't thinking anything by it. It was just a thing they said or did, and they've already moved on, and they have no idea you've been carrying the weight of it for 72 hours. And you don't know whether to feel relieved or more anxious, because if they weren't thinking anything by it, then all of that was in your head. And if all of that was in your head, how much other stuff is in your head? And if you can't tell the difference between real signals and fabricated ones, how do you ever trust your own read on anything? So the conversation you tried to have to get clarity ends up producing more questions than it answered, and the cycle starts again. That's not a communication problem. That's not a compatibility problem. That's overthinking making a relationship harder than it needs to be by introducing a third party into every interaction, the version of the other person that exists in your head, running their lines in the scenarios you've scripted, behaving in the ways your anxiety has assigned them. That third party is not real, but they take up a lot of space. Let me talk about where this comes from. Not in a blame your childhood way, though honestly sometimes it is partly that, but in the way that's useful. The way that helps you understand the mechanism so you can start to work with it instead of just being run by it. Overthinking is almost always rooted in one of two things, sometimes both at once. The first is a history of things going wrong in ways you didn't see coming. If you've been blindsided before, hurt in a way you didn't anticipate, by someone you trusted, in a situation you thought was safe, your brain learns a lesson. The lesson is you didn't see it coming last time and it cost you. So this time you will see it coming. This time you will watch for it. This time you will be ready. And your brain takes that lesson seriously. It starts scanning constantly for anything that could be an early signal, for any pattern that resembles the one that came before the hurt. It gets very good at finding those patterns, partly because they're real sometimes, and partly because if you look hard enough at anything, you can make it resemble almost any pattern you're searching for. The second root is a low-grade belief that things won't work out for you specifically, that good things are fragile and temporary and will be taken away, that you are, in some fundamental way, more likely to lose what you love than to keep it. And so the overthinking is partly preparation. If you can anticipate the loss, you can brace for it. You can be ready, and partly a way of maintaining a small amount of control in situations where you feel fundamentally out of control. Neither of those roots make you broken. They make you someone who learned to protect themselves in the only way that made sense at the time. The problem is that protection has outlasted the thing it was protecting against, and now it's protecting you from things that aren't actually threatening. And the protection itself is the thing doing the damage. I want to talk about what overthinking does to your sense of self. because I think this is the part that goes most unacknowledged and does the deepest damage. When you overthink long enough, when you spend enough time living inside hypothetical versions of events rather than actual ones, you start to lose the thread of who you actually are underneath all the analysis. Because overthinking requires you to constantly model other people, to simulate how they see you, what they think of you, how they're interpreting your words and actions. And the more you do that, the more your sense of yourself becomes contingent on those simulations. You start to know yourself primarily through the imagined eyes of other people. Your self-image becomes a composite of all the ways you've imagined being perceived. That's not a self, that's a performance with no audience. And the real you, the one with instincts and preferences and reactions that don't need to be analyzed before they're allowed to exist, that person gets quieter and quieter the longer the machine runs. Because every time a feeling or an instinct arises, the overthinking brain immediately intercepts it, runs it through the filter, asks whether it's appropriate, whether it's too much, whether expressing it will cause a problem. And most of the time, the feeling gets managed instead of felt, processed instead of expressed, filed away instead of lived. You become someone who is very good at understanding emotions and very unpracticed at actually having them in real time. That's a loss, a quiet, accumulating, significant loss. Here's what nobody tells you about trying to stop overthinking. You cannot think your way out of overthinking. I know how obvious that sounds. I know. But it's genuinely the trap that most people fall into. You start overthinking about why you overthink. You analyze your patterns, you construct frameworks for understanding your anxiety, you research it, you journal about it, you build elaborate systems for catching yourself in the act. And all of that is more thinking, more spinning. You've just redirected the machine at itself and called it progress. The actual movement happens somewhere other than your head. It happens in your body, in learning to notice when you've left the present moment, and practicing the physical act of returning to it. It happens in action, and making the small decision without running it through the full analysis, and finding out that the sky doesn't fall, and slowly building evidence that your instincts are actually okay. It happens in relationships, in telling someone what's happening inside you instead of managing it alone, and finding out that being known doesn't destroy things the way you were afraid it would. It happens slowly, non-linearly, with setbacks that feel like starting over but aren't. And it requires you to do the thing that overthinking was always trying to prevent. Be uncertain. Be in something without knowing how it ends. Be present in a moment without having already lived 6 versions of it in your head. That is genuinely terrifying if you are someone who has been using certainty, even imaginary certainty, as a survival tool. But the alternative is staying in the machine, and the machine is running you into the ground. I want to say something directly to the version of you that is reading this at whatever hour this is, probably not sleeping. Probably turning something over that started as a small thing 3 hours ago and has since become a fully constructed crisis. You are not crazy. You are not broken. You are not fundamentally unable to have peace. You are someone whose brain learned to be very, very busy, and busy kept you safe once. And now busy is just busy. It's not keeping you safe. It's keeping you from resting, from connecting, from being in your own life without the constant background noise of what if and what does it mean and what's going to happen. The thought you're carrying right now, the one that feels urgent, the one that feels like if you just think about it a little longer, you'll finally land on the answer that makes it okay. That thought is lying to you. The answer isn't in more thinking. The answer is in putting it down long enough to find out that the world didn't end when you stopped holding it. You are allowed to rest. Now you've figured it all out. Now, before the resolution, before the certainty, before you've run every scenario to its conclusion. Now, in the middle of not knowing, that's the only place rest is ever actually available. Overthinking is killing you slowly, stealing your sleep, your presence, your relationships, your trust in yourself, your ability to just be somewhere without immediately trying to understand and analyze and prepare for what being there might mean. You know this. You've known this. The problem was never that you didn't understand the damage. The problem is that stopping felt more dangerous than continuing. But you've been doing this long enough now to know that the danger isn't out there. It was never really out there. It was always in here. In the machine, in the loop, in the version of events your brain constructed and then handed you to live inside of. The real thing, your actual life, the people actually in it, the moments actually happening, that's been waiting for you this whole time, just on the other side of the noise. All you have to do is let the noise get a little quieter. Not gone, just quieter. That's enough. That's all it takes to start. You know what hurts the most? It's not being rejected, it's realizing the person you care about never felt the same way to begin with. Not in the way you did. Not in the way you hoped they did. And the worst part is, you didn't realize it right away. Because at first everything felt real. The conversations felt natural, the laughs felt genuine, the late night talks felt personal. There were moments where it seemed like something deeper was building between you. Little moments that made you believe this could actually turn into something. And when you start believing that, your heart slowly gets involved. Not all at once, but piece by piece. You start paying more attention to them. You notice the way their voice changes when they're excited, the way they talk about the things they care about, the way their mood shifts when something's bothering them. You start remembering small details about them without even trying, things they mentioned once in passing, their favorite music, their favorite food, the stories about their past, and without realizing it, they begin taking up more space in your mind. You think about them when something funny happens. You think about them when you hear a song they would like. You think about them when something reminds you of a conversation you once had. That's how feelings grow, quietly, naturally, without asking permission. But somewhere along the way, something starts to feel different, not wrong, just uneven. You notice that you're always the one starting conversations. You're the one asking questions, the one keeping things going, the one making the effort to stay connected. They still respond. They still talk to you. They still laugh and joke like everything is normal. But something about it feels lighter for them, like they're enjoying the moment, but not investing in it the same way you are. And you try not to think too much about it because you don't want to ruin what you have. You tell yourself you're overthinking. You tell yourself they might just be busy or distracted or maybe just not good at expressing their feelings. So you keep showing up, you keep being patient, you keep being kind. Because part of you believes that if you're consistent enough, if you're supportive enough, if you care enough, maybe one day something will change. Maybe one day they'll look at you differently. Maybe one day they'll realize you were there all along. Maybe one day the feeling will finally grow on their side too. But deep down, there's a quiet fear you try not to face. A small voice that keeps asking the same question. What if they never feel the same way? And that thought is something your heart isn't ready to accept yet. Title: She Doesn't Feel the Same Way. Part 2. The hardest part isn't the moment you realize she doesn't feel the same way. It's everything that happens before that moment. The waiting, the hoping, the convincing yourself that maybe you just need to give it more time. Because feelings don't always grow instantly, right? Sometimes people just need space. Sometimes they need to see your consistency. Sometimes they need to realize what's right in front of them. At least that's what you keep telling yourself. So you keep showing up. You keep answering her messages. You keep making time for her even when your day is busy. You listen when she talks about her problems. You support her when she's stressed. You try to be the person she can always rely on, the person who understands her, the person who stays. And slowly, you start building this idea in your head, not just about who she is, but about who the two of you could be together. You imagine simple things, conversations that haven't happened yet, moments that might happen someday, little scenarios where everything finally clicks into place. And those thoughts feel good. They make the waiting feel worth it. They make the uncertainty easier to ignore. Because as long as there's still a possibility, you don't have to let go of the hope. But reality has a quiet way of revealing itself. Not all at once. Not with some dramatic moment, just small things that slowly start adding up. Like the way she talks about someone else, not realizing how it lands when she says it. Or how she mentions a guy she finds attractive. Like it's just normal conversation. Like it wouldn't affect you. Or the way she disappears for hours, sometimes days, then comes back like nothing happened. And you're just happy she replied at all. Even if the message is short, even if the effort feels minimal, you start noticing the imbalance, but you don't want to believe it means something, because admitting the truth would mean facing a reality you've been avoiding, that maybe you care more than she ever will, that maybe you've been building something in your mind that she never intended to build with you. And the worst part is, she didn't lie to you. She didn't promise anything. She didn't say the words that would make you believe she felt the same way. You just filled in the silence yourself. You interpreted the kindness as something deeper, the attention as something meaningful, the connection as something mutual, but kindness isn't always love. Attention isn't always interest, and connection doesn't always mean someone sees you the way you see them. And slowly, the truth starts getting harder to ignore, not because she suddenly tells you, but because her actions begin saying something your heart can't keep pretending not to hear. She doesn't feel the same way. And the longer you hold on to hope, the heavier that realization becomes. At some point, the truth stops whispering, and it starts becoming impossible to ignore. Not because she finally sits you down and says the words. Most of the time, that conversation never even happens. The truth shows up in quieter ways than that. It shows up in patterns, in effort, in the way someone chooses to show up in your life, or the way they don't. You start noticing things you used to overlook. How you're always the one starting the conversation. How if you stop texting first, the silence stretches longer than you expected. Hours, sometimes days, and eventually you break. You send the message anyway, because pretending you don't care feels harder than admitting that you do. You start noticing the energy difference too. How excited you are when she replies, and how normal it seems for her, like your presence in her life is something she can take or leave, not something she's worried about losing. That realization hurts in a very specific way, because you're not asking for everything. You're not asking for grand gestures or dramatic confessions. You're just asking for something simple, to feel chosen. But when someone truly wants you, you don't have to beg for that feeling. You don't have to analyze every message. You don't have to question whether you matter. It becomes obvious. And that's when the realization finally hits you. Not all at once, but slowly, like a weight settling on your chest. She doesn't feel the same way. Not in the way you hoped. Not in the way you needed. Maybe she likes you. Maybe she enjoys talking to you. Maybe she appreciates having you around. But there's a difference between appreciating someone and wanting to build something with them. And you start asking yourself questions you were too afraid to ask before. Was I just convenient? Was I just someone who was always there when she needed attention? Was I just filling space in her life while she waited for someone else? Those thoughts sting. But the deeper pain isn't even about her, it's about what you did to yourself while hoping things would change. How long you ignored your own feelings. How long you accepted less than you deserved. How long you told yourself to be patient, when patience wasn't the solution. Because love doesn't grow out of one person trying harder. Love doesn't appear just because you stayed long enough. Love isn't something you can earn by proving your loyalty and realizing that forces you to face a difficult truth. You can't make someone feel something they don't, no matter how good you are to them, no matter how much you care, no matter how much you wish it were different. And once that truth settles in, you're left with a choice, one that hurts either way. Keep holding on to someone who never chose you, or finally let go, even though part of you still wishes she would. Because the hardest thing about loving someone who doesn't feel the same way isn't losing them. It's accepting that you were never really theirs to begin with. At first, letting go doesn't feel like strength. It feels like defeat, like you're walking away from something that could have worked. If only things were slightly different. If only she saw you the way you saw her. If only she realized how much you cared. If only timing was better. If only you had said the right thing at the right moment. Your mind keeps replaying those what ifs over and over again, because your heart would rather believe in a small chance than accept a painful truth. But eventually something starts to shift inside you, not dramatically, not overnight, just slowly. You start noticing how tired you are, tired of hoping, tired of waiting, tired of checking your phone for a message that may or may not come, tired of feeling like your happiness depends on someone else's attention. And that's when a different kind of realization hits you, one that hurts, but also frees you. You didn't lose her because you never had her. What you lost was the version of her you created in your mind, the version that loved you back, the version that chose you, the version that saw your worth the same way you saw hers. But that version never actually existed. It was just hope, and hope can be beautiful, but when it's built on the wrong person, it slowly becomes something painful. You start seeing things more clearly, how much effort you gave, how much patience you showed, how much of yourself you poured into someone who never asked for it. And instead of feeling embarrassed about that, you begin to understand something important. There's nothing wrong with loving deeply. There's nothing wrong with caring. There's nothing wrong with believing in someone. The only mistake is giving all of that to someone who was never willing to meet you halfway. And the truth is, one day you're going to meet someone who does. Someone who doesn't make you question where you stand. Someone who doesn't make you guess how they feel. Someone who doesn't make you feel like loving them is a risk. Because when someone truly wants you, you won't have to convince them. You won't have to compete for their attention. You won't have to sit there wondering if you're enough. They'll show you clearly, consistently, without confusion. And when that happens, you'll look back at this version of yourself. The one who stayed too long, the one who hoped too hard, the one who loved someone who couldn't love him back. And instead of feeling regret, you'll feel something else. Gratitude. Because that experience didn't break you. It taught you. It taught you what love shouldn't feel like. And most importantly, it taught you that the right person will never leave you wondering why they don't feel the same way. Because when someone truly loves you, you'll never have to ask that question again. I want to be clear about something up front. This isn't a sad story, or it is, in parts, but it's not the kind where I'm sitting in a dim room telling you about all the ways love failed me and how I gave up. That's not what this is. That's not why I'm here. I am here because I made a choice. An actual, deliberate, eyes-open choice. And I think that choice is one of the more honest things I've ever done for myself. And I also think most people won't understand it until they've been where I've been. So let me try to explain it. The first thing you need to know is that I wasn't always like this. There was a version of me, not that long ago honestly, who was completely all in on the whole thing. The relationship, the partnership, the building a life with someone project. I believed in it. Not in a naive way, not in a Disney movie way, but in the way a person believes in something they've thought seriously about and decided is worth pursuing. I wanted the person who knew my coffee order without asking. I wanted someone to text when something small but funny happened. I wanted the Sunday mornings and the inside jokes and the specific kind of comfort that only comes from being truly known by another person over time. I wanted all of it, genuinely, for years, and I went looking for it. Over and over again with real effort, real openness, real willingness to be vulnerable and present, and all the things the books and the podcasts tell you to be, and I kept coming back empty. Not devastated, just empty. Like I'd gone to the well expecting water and found it dry again, and had to walk back the same long road carrying nothing. After enough trips, I stopped going to the well. That's not giving up, that's pattern recognition. Here's what the pattern looked like, because I think this part matters. Every relationship I was in, or almost in, or orbiting around, had the same shape to it. Not the same people, not the same details, but the same underlying geometry. I would show up fully. That was just how I did it. I don't know how to be half in something. Never learned. When I was there, I was completely there, present, invested, paying attention, caring about the small stuff, because the small stuff is where people actually live, and for a while that energy would get matched. The beginning always felt mutual. There was something real there. I wasn't imagining it. The connection was genuine. The warmth was genuine. The feeling that this might actually be the thing was genuine. And then, slowly, something would shift. Not a dramatic shift. Not a fight or a betrayal or a definitive turning point. Just a gradual, almost imperceptible drift toward a symmetry, where I was still all the way in, and they had quietly moved to something closer to halfway. And I would notice it and not say anything because I didn't want to be the person who was keeping score. And I would adjust my expectations down a little, and I would fill in the gaps with generous interpretations, and I would keep going until I couldn't, and then it would end. Either because I finally said something, or they finally left, or it just quietly died from the weight of its own imbalance, and I would be the one sitting with the full grief of it while they seemed, from the outside, at least, more or less fine. That happened enough times that I had to ask myself a serious question. Is this bad luck? Or is this me? And the answer, the honest one, the one I had to sit with for a long time before I could say it clearly, was both. Some of it was bad luck. Some of it was timing, incompatibility, the simple fact that most relationships don't work out, and that's not a reflection of anyone's worth. But some of it was me, specifically a version of me that I had been dragging into every relationship without fully examining it. I was choosing people who needed to be convinced, not in a dramatic way, not people who were cruel or checked out completely, but people who were, at their core, slightly ambivalent, people who were kind of available, sort of interested, generally positive, but never quite fully choosing me, people for whom I was a good option, but not the obvious one. And I kept choosing them because I confused the work of convincing someone with the feeling of earning something. Like if I had to work for it, it must be worth something. Like if it came easily, it probably wasn't real. That's a broken piece of logic, and I ran it for years. The love I was chasing was the love that felt like proof. Proof that I was worth the effort. Proof that someone who wasn't sure could become sure because of me, because of what I brought, because of who I was when I was fully present. What I actually found every time was people who remained a little unsure, and me, exhausted from the convincing, wondering why it still felt like I was auditioning. You cannot love someone into certainty. I know that now. Certainty about a person is something you either have or you don't. It's not something that gets built through accumulated evidence. But I didn't know it then. I kept trying to build it, and I kept being surprised when the foundation didn't hold. So I stopped. Not dramatically, no announcement, no declaration. I just stopped putting myself in situations that I already knew the shape of. Stopped swiping. Stopped accepting the half invitations from people who were interested in theory, but not in practice. Stopped extending myself toward things I could already tell weren't going to hold. And the first thing I noticed was how much energy I got back. That sounds almost embarrassingly simple, but it's real. The amount of mental and emotional bandwidth that I had been pouring into other people, into decoding their behavior, into managing my own hope, into the constant quiet work of being in something that wasn't quite working. That bandwidth suddenly had nowhere to go, and it came back to me. It's the strangest feeling. Suddenly having access to your own full attention. Suddenly being the primary recipient of your own care. I'd been so focused outward for so long that being focused inward felt almost disorienting at first. Like, what do I actually like? Not what do I like doing with someone else? What do I like alone, for no reason except that it's good for me? I had to relearn that, which is a little embarrassing to admit, but it's true. I want to be careful here, because I think there's a version of this story that slides into something self-congratulatory. Like, I chose myself, I learned to love being alone, now everything is better and I don't need anyone. That's not what I'm saying. That version is a little too clean, and I don't trust it. The truth is, being alone is hard in ways that being in a bad relationship is not. Being in a bad relationship is its own kind of hard. The grief of it, the confusion of it, the way it chips at you, I'm not romanticizing that. But there's a version of the suffering in a relationship that at least has company. You're not okay, but you're not okay with someone. There's another person in the room. Being alone means being not okay by yourself. It means the hard nights are genuinely quiet. It means there's no one to reach for when you wake up and the world feels like too much. It means birthdays and holidays and Sunday afternoons that can feel very wide and very empty if you let them. I feel that. I'm not pretending I don't, but here's the difference. When I was in those half relationships, those asymmetrical things, I felt alone anyway. I felt alone while texting someone. I felt alone at dinner with someone. I felt alone in the middle of a conversation with someone who was technically present but not really there. I felt alone in the specific, suffocating way that only happens when you're with another person who isn't meeting you. That kind of alone is worse than the real kind, because the real kind is honest. It doesn't pretend to be something it isn't. It doesn't make you question yourself. It doesn't ask you to keep pouring into it while it gives you just enough warmth to stay. Alone is just quiet. And quiet I can work with. There's something that started happening after a few months of this that I didn't expect. I started liking myself more. Not in a self-help affirmation way, in a specific practical way. I started noticing things about myself that I genuinely liked, qualities that had always been there, but that I'd been spending so much energy managing in the context of other people that I hadn't fully felt them. My ability to sit with hard things without needing to immediately fix them. The way I think about problems. The strange, specific humor that only really comes out when I'm comfortable. The things I care about that I used to soften or shrink because I wasn't sure they'd land with whoever I was trying to impress. Those things don't need to be approved of when there's no one to approve them. They just are. They're just mine. And I realized, and this is the part that hit me harder than I expected, I realized that for years I had been trying to get other people to validate things about me that I hadn't validated for myself yet. I was looking for them to confirm that I was worth loving before I'd really decided that for myself. That's not a thing another person can do for you. I see that clearly now. You can be loved by a dozen people and still feel worthless if you haven't done the internal work. Love from the outside doesn't fill the inside. It just temporarily covers the gap. I had to do that work. And I could not do it while I was constantly looking outward. let me tell you about a specific night that I think about sometimes. It was a Saturday, about 4 months into doing this thing deliberately. And I had nothing going on, no plans, no one to meet, no one to check in with, just a whole evening by myself. A few months earlier, that would have felt like failure, like evidence of something wrong with my life. I would have spent half of it anxious, texting people, trying to manufacture some company, telling myself I was fine while quietly being not fine at all. That night I made dinner, took longer than I needed to, listened to music I liked at a volume I liked, ate at my own table in my own time without checking my phone, watched something I'd been meaning to watch for a long time, went to bed when I was actually tired, not because there was nothing else to do. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, I realized I was happy. Not in an event way, not because something good had happened, just quietly, steadily happy, content actually, in a way that didn't require anything from anyone. That felt new, that felt important, because I think for most of my adult life, I had been treating happiness as a thing that required ingredients, people, plans, someone to share it with. And that night I discovered it could just be a state, a default, something you could arrive at by removing the things that were disrupting it rather than adding more things to try to create it. That was the night I really understood why I'd chosen this. I want to address the thing people say, because there are a few responses you get when you tell someone you're choosing to be alone, and most of them are well-meaning but not quite right. The first one is, you'll change your mind when you meet the right person. Maybe. I'm not ruling it out. I'm not taking a vow. But this statement assumes that the choice to be alone is a temporary state of waiting, like I'm just in a holding pattern until the right flight comes in. And that framing misses the whole point. I'm not waiting. I'm here. I'm actually fully here, in this life, right now. Not as a placeholder until something better comes along. The second one is you're scared of getting hurt. And look, yes, obviously, I'm a person. I've been hurt, and getting hurt is part of the record. But choosing to be alone isn't the same as choosing to be closed. I'm not building walls, I'm building a self that is solid enough that the next time I open up to someone, I'm doing it from a place of wholeness instead of a place of need. There's a difference between protecting yourself out of fear and protecting yourself out of self-respect. One closes everything down and the other just raises the standard. The third one, and this is the one that's hardest to explain, is, but don't you get lonely? Yes, sometimes, of course. But loneliness that comes from being alone is clean, it's honest. It points at a real thing, a real gap, a real human need. And I can sit with it, name it, feel it, and let it pass. That's survivable. That's just being human. The loneliness that comes from being in the wrong relationship and from being with someone and still feeling unseen, unchosen, like a guest in something that should feel like home, that loneliness has no clean edge. You can't point to it. You can't name it without sounding ungrateful. You can't let it pass because the source of it is still right there next to you. And every day you're in it, you're just adding more distance between yourself and the life you actually want. I'll take the honest loneliness every time. I've been thinking lately about what I actually want. Not as a performance of self-awareness, like the real list, the one I'd only tell myself. I want to feel chosen, really chosen. Not tolerated, not convenient, not the best available option for someone who's still looking over their shoulder. Chosen. The way you choose something when you thought about it clearly and you still want it. The way you choose something and then keep choosing it on the days when it's difficult. I want someone who wants to know me. Not the surface, not the job and the opinions and the easy conversation. The actual me. The specific, sometimes difficult, definitely imperfect actual person. I want it to feel mutual. I want to stop being the one who loves more, works more, stays more. I want to be in something that meets me somewhere in the middle and stays there. And I decided, and this is the core of all of this, I decided that I would rather wait for that thing than keep settling for the shapes of it. I would rather be here in my own life, fully present and genuinely okay, than be in something halfway good that slowly costs me myself. That's not lowering my expectations. It's raising them. It's saying it's this specific thing, this particular experience of being really seen and really chosen and really met. That's what I'm holding out for. Not perfection, not the absence of difficulty, just mutuality, just real. And until that's available, I'm here. I'm fine here. I'm more than fine. So that's why I chose to be alone. Not because love failed me, though it did sometimes. Not because I stopped believing in it, because I didn't. Not because I'm scared, though fear is part of everything. Because I finally got honest about what I was actually doing when I kept showing up for things that weren't working. I was filling a space, managing a loneliness, keeping myself busy with the project of someone else so I didn't have to sit with the quieter, harder project of myself. And the quieter, harder project turned out to be the important one. I know who I am now in a way I didn't before. I know what I need, I know what I'm willing to give and what I'm not willing to keep giving to things that take it without returning it. I know the difference between loving someone and needing them to make me feel like I'm okay. That knowledge didn't come from a relationship, it came from the absence of one. From enough quiet to actually hear myself. And when the right person comes, if they come, when they come, I'll be someone worth finding. Not someone still figuring out what they want. Not someone so hungry for connection that they'll take any version of it. Someone whole. Someone who wants it but doesn't need it to survive. Someone who chose themselves first and is now maybe ready to choose someone else. That's the version of this I want. That's what I've been building toward. And it started with choosing to be alone. Will I ever be loved? There's a question some people carry around that they never really say out loud. It doesn't come up in conversations. It's not something you ask your friends. And it's definitely not something you post online. But it sits quietly in the back of your mind. The question is simple. Will I ever be loved? Not liked. Not tolerated. Not someone people talk to when they're bored. Loved. The kind of love where someone chooses you. The kind where they stay. Because if you're being honest with yourself, you've probably watched it happen for everyone else. You see couples walking together. Friends getting engaged. People talking about their person like they're the most natural thing in the world. And part of you is happy for them. But another part of you can't help wondering, why has that never happened to me? You've tried before. You've talked to people. You've opened up. You've let yourself believe that maybe this time it could be different. And for a moment, it always feels promising. They laugh at your jokes. They text you first. They tell you they enjoy talking to you. And you start to think maybe this is finally it. Maybe this is the person who's going to stay. But then something always changes. The messages get shorter. The effort starts fading. The energy you once felt from them slowly disappears. Till one day you realize something that hurts more than anything. You cared way more than they did. And after that happens enough times, you stop asking what went wrong with the relationship. You start asking what's wrong with you. You look in the mirror and start picking yourself apart. Maybe I'm not attractive enough. Maybe I'm too quiet. Maybe I'm too emotional. Maybe I'm just not the type of person someone chooses. And the worst part about that feeling is that nobody around you sees it. To everyone else, you seem normal. You go to work. You talk to people. You laugh when you're supposed to. But inside, there's this quiet loneliness that never really leaves. Because wanting to be loved isn't some dramatic fantasy. It's one of the most human things there is. To have someone who looks at you and thinks, I want this person in my life. Not temporarily, not when it's convenient, but for real. And when you've spent years feeling like that hasn't happened for you yet, that's when the doubt starts creeping in. You start wondering if maybe some people are just meant to watch love happen for everyone else and never experience it themselves. After a while, the question doesn't just stay in the back of your mind. It starts showing up everywhere. You'll be scrolling through your phone and see someone you went to school with, posting pictures with their partner, smiling, laughing, looking like they found something real. And you pause for a second, not because you're jealous in a hateful way, but because you can't help thinking, how did they figure it out? How did they find someone who chose them? Because from where you're standing, it almost feels like everyone else received instructions for love that you never got. Some people fall into relationships so easily, they meet someone, they click, and suddenly they're building a life together. Meanwhile, you're still sitting there wondering why every connection you try seems to fade before it ever becomes something real. You replay old conversations in your head, moments where you thought things were going well, the way they used to respond quickly, the way they seemed interested in you, the way they said things that made you believe they actually cared, and then you remember the shift, that slow change where their energy started pulling away, the delayed replies, the canceled plans, the feeling that you were the only one trying to keep things alive, until eventually you stopped hearing from them altogether. And what hurts the most about those moments isn't just losing the person. It's realizing how easily they walked away. Like the connection that meant so much to you, it didn't really mean that much to them. That's the part that sticks with you. Because after enough of those experiences, something inside you starts changing. You become more cautious. You hesitate before getting excited about someone new. You stop letting yourself believe things too quickly. Not because you don't want love, but because disappointment starts feeling predictable. And eventually you find yourself doing something you never used to do before. You start preparing for people to leave. Even when someone new enters your life and things feel good, there's this quiet voice in the back of your mind saying, don't get too attached. It probably won't last. So instead of enjoying the moment, you hold part of yourself back. You protect your feelings. You stay guarded. And the strange thing about that kind of loneliness is that it doesn't always happen when you're physically alone. You can be surrounded by people, talking, laughing, living your life. But deep down, there's still this quiet uncertainty, because the question never really disappears. Late at night, when everything gets quiet, it comes back again. Will someone ever truly love me? Not temporarily, not out of convenience, but the kind of love where someone looks at you and decides you're worth staying for. And when you've spent years feeling like you're still waiting for that moment, it's hard not to start wondering if maybe it was never meant for you at all. The hardest part about carrying that question, will I ever be loved, is that eventually it stops sounding like a question. It starts sounding like an answer. After enough disappointments, enough people leaving, enough almost relationships that never become real, something inside you slowly shifts. You stop expecting love, not dramatically, not in some big moment where you say you're done with relationships forever. It's quieter than that. You just stop hoping the same way you used to. When you meet someone new, you don't let yourself imagine a future with them anymore. You don't let your mind wander into those what-if scenarios, because every time you did that in the past, it eventually ended the same way they left. So now you protect yourself. You convince yourself that you don't really need love like other people do. You focus on work, on hobbies, on building a life that doesn't rely on anyone staying. And on the outside, it actually starts to look like you're doing better. You're more independent. You don't chase people anymore. You don't beg for attention. You don't sit around waiting for someone to text you back. But what most people don't see is the quiet sadness that comes with that kind of independence. Because deep down, you never actually stop wanting love. You just stop believing it would happen. There's a difference, and that difference shows up in the smallest moments. Like when you're walking somewhere alone and you see a couple holding hands, or when your friends start talking about their relationships and the little things their partner does for them, or when you're lying in bed at night and the room is completely silent. That's when the thought slips back in again. What if it never happens for me? What if I'm one of those people who's always the friend, always the listener, always the one who's there for everyone else, but never the person someone chooses? Because when you've spent enough time feeling overlooked, it starts changing the way you see yourself. You begin assuming that if someone better walks into their life, they'll choose them instead of you. That if someone more exciting shows up, you'll be forgotten. So you keep your expectations low. You tell yourself you're fine on your own. But the truth is, there's still a small part of you that wonders what it would feel like to have someone who doesn't hesitate, someone who doesn't disappear when things get complicated, someone who looks at you and doesn't need time to decide. They just know, and maybe the scariest part of all is realizing how badly you still want that, even after everything, even after the doubt, even after convincing yourself you don't need it. That small part of you still hopes that one day someone will walk into your life and prove that all those fears were wrong. But here's something most people don't realize when they ask that question. Will I ever be loved? The problem isn't that you're unlovable. The problem is that when you've been hurt enough times, you start measuring your worth by the people who didn't stay. You start using their choices as proof that you weren't enough, proof that you were easy to leave, proof that maybe love just isn't something meant for you. But those people were never the judges of your value. They were just people who passed through your life. And sometimes people leave not because you lacked something, but because they were never meant to stay long enough to see everything you are. The truth is, love doesn't happen on a schedule. Some people find it early. They meet someone at 18, 20, 22, and it feels like their life just clicked into place. But for a lot of people, it takes longer. Not because they're less worthy, but because the kind of love they're meant to have requires the right person. And the right person isn't someone who hesitates about you. It's not someone who keeps you guessing. It's not someone who makes you question whether you matter. The right person doesn't make you feel like you're asking for too much just by wanting to be chosen. They make it clear, effortlessly. And when that kind of love finally shows up, it doesn't feel like chasing. It doesn't feel like proving yourself. It doesn't feel like begging someone to stay. It feels calm, like something that was always supposed to happen just at the right time. So if you've been sitting with that question for a long time, if you've spent nights wondering whether anyone will ever truly choose you, here's the truth you need to hear. The fact that the wrong people left your life doesn't mean the right person never will enter it. It just means your story hasn't reached that chapter yet. And one day, when someone finally walks into your life and stays without hesitation, you'll realize something that used to be impossible to believe. You were never unlovable. You were just waiting for someone who could actually see you. There's a version of you that exists only in your head. It's the version that said the wrong thing in that conversation 3 years ago and is still replaying it. The version that's already prepared a full emotional response to a fight that hasn't happened yet. The version that read one slightly short text message and spent 45 minutes building a case for why everything is falling apart. That version of you is exhausting, and it never sleeps. And if you're being honest, it runs a lot more of your life than you'd like to admit. I've been thinking about this for a while, not in a clinical way. I'm not here to diagnose anything or hand you a breathing exercise, but in the way you think about something when you've lived inside it long enough that you finally want to understand it. When the pattern has repeated enough times that you're done being surprised by it and ready to actually look at it. Because I think a lot of us are losing to our own minds, quietly, daily, in ways that don't look dramatic from the outside, but are absolutely exhausting from the inside. And I think we've been told it's just anxiety, it's just overthinking. Take a walk, drink some water, journal about it. And none of that is wrong exactly, but it's also not quite getting at the thing. The thing is deeper than a habit, it's closer to a worldview. Let me start at the beginning, or at least the beginning as I understand it. Your mind learned to do this. It wasn't born doing it. At some point, probably pretty early, you were in a situation where paying close attention to other people's moods and signals and the slightest shifts in their behavior was actually useful. Where catching the early warning signs kept you from getting hurt. Where being one step ahead of a situation meant you could manage it before it managed you. So your brain got good at that. Really good. Exceptionally, almost professionally good at scanning for threat, at noticing the micro shift in someone's tone and running it through a threat assessment model at lightning speed, at filling in the gaps between what people say and what they might mean with worst case scenarios, because worst case scenarios are what your brain learned to prepare for. That was adaptive once. It kept you safe. It helped you navigate something that was genuinely hard to navigate, but you carried it out of that situation and into every situation after it. And now you're threat scanning in a text message from someone who loves you. Now you're running worst case scenarios about a meeting that hasn't happened yet. Now you're braced for impact in environments that are not actually dangerous, with people who are not actually threatening, because your nervous system never got the memo that the original thing ended. It's still doing its job. The job is just wrong for where you are now. Here's what overthinking actually feels like from the inside, because I think it gets flattened into a word, overthinking, and that word doesn't capture the texture of it. It starts with a small thing, almost always a small thing that your mind snags on the way a nail snags a piece of clothing, something someone said or didn't say, the way a conversation ended, a silence that lasted a second too long, a tone that was slightly off from how it usually sounds. Most people's brains would register that small thing, file it under probably nothing, and move on. Your brain doesn't do that. Your brain picks it up and starts turning it over, looking at it from every angle, running through possible explanations, building a context around it. And because your brain is very good at building context, because you are honestly an intelligent and perceptive person, the context it builds is detailed, specific, coherent. It has internal logic, it hangs together. It just might be completely wrong. And here's the brutal part. You know it might be wrong. Somewhere in there, underneath all the architecture your brain is constructing, there's a quieter voice saying, you don't actually know this. You're guessing this might be nothing. But the louder voice, like the one with all the evidence it's been collecting, the one that has built this whole case, That voice is very convincing. It has receipts. It has a timeline. It has a narrative that makes sense, so you believe it, or at least you half believe it, enough to act on it, enough to pull back a little or go quiet or preemptively protect yourself from a wound that might not be coming. And then the thing you were afraid of might actually happen, not because you were right, but because the way you responded to your own fear created the distance you were trying to prevent. That's the loop. That's the one that runs your life if you let it. I want to talk about relationships specifically because I think this is where the overthinking mind does its most significant damage. And I think it's because relationships are inherently ambiguous, people are complicated, communication is imperfect, feelings shift. And ambiguity is exactly the kind of environment where an overthinking brain absolutely goes to town. You're with someone, or close to being with someone, and things are good, things are genuinely good, but your brain doesn't fully trust good. Good feels precarious. Good feels like a setup for something. So even while things are good, there's a part of you that's quietly scanning for the thing that's going to make it not good. And because you're scanning for it, you find things. Not because they're definitely there, but because if you look hard enough at anything, any relationship, any person, you will find ambiguity. You will find moments that could be read multiple ways. You will find evidence for almost any narrative if that's what you're building. So you find something, a slightly distant response, a canceled plan, a moment where they seem somewhere else, and the machine kicks in. And now you're building the case for why this is falling apart while simultaneously pretending everything is fine. Because you know that bringing this up will make you seem crazy, will make you seem like too much, so you hold it. You process it internally. You have the conversation in your head 100 times. You prepare for outcomes that haven't happened. You grieve things that are still here. And all of that invisible work, all of that mental labor that the other person has no idea is happening, exhausts you, makes you quieter than you actually are, makes you pull back when you want to be close, makes you act in ways that are slightly misaligned with how you actually feel, because you're not responding to reality. You're responding to the story your brain wrote about reality, and eventually, inevitably, the other person notices that something is off, not what's actually off. They can't see that. It's all internal. Just that something is off. And they adjust. And you interpret their adjustment as confirmation of the story you already wrote. And the loop tightens. Here's the part I want to sit with for a minute, because I think it's the part that gets missed. Overthinking isn't just a processing style. It's also, underneath everything, a form of control. Stay with me on this. When you can't control whether someone is going to hurt you, and you never can. That's just the fundamental vulnerability of caring about people. Your brain finds another way to feel in control. It prepares, it anticipates, it runs every possible scenario so that when something goes wrong, at least you saw it coming. At least you're not blindsided. At least the pain arrives in a context you already built. Because being blindsided feels worse than being right about something bad. Being surprised by loss feels more devastating than having predicted it. So your brain works very hard, all the time, to make sure you are never surprised. The cost of that is never being fully present, never being fully relaxed into something good, always holding a part of yourself back, just in case, always watching the door even when you're inside somewhere warm. It's a terrible trade, but it feels like the safer one, and your brain is always going to root toward what feels safe. Let me tell you what the really insidious version of this looks like. Because the everyday overthinking, the text analysis, the reading of rooms, the pre-lived arguments, that stuff is visible enough that you can at least identify it. The insidious version is quieter. It's the way you talk yourself out of good things before they have a chance to become good. Someone shows interest, and instead of letting yourself feel that, you immediately start cataloging their flaws. Not because they're actually deal breakers, because if you can find enough flaws, then when it doesn't work out, you can point to the flaws. You already knew you were never fully in it. It's the way you self-sabotage in advance. Pull back before they can pull back. End it before it can end badly. Leave before you can be left. It's the way you rewrite your own history to confirm the story your brain likes to tell. You felt something real, and then it hurt. And now when you look back at it, your brain has quietly edited the memory so that the signs were always there. You should have known. You were naive to trust it. Look how clearly it was written on the wall from the beginning. It wasn't written on the wall from the beginning. You were just present, open, hoping the way a person is supposed to be, and something went wrong, and now your brain is retroactively building the case that you should have been closed, because being closed would have hurt less, being closed would have hurt less, and also produced nothing, and also made you smaller, and also been a kind of living death. But your brain doesn't calculate for aliveness, it calculates for safety. And sometimes safety and aliveness point in completely opposite directions. I've been thinking about the relationship between overthinking and self-worth, because I don't think they're separate things. I think a lot of people who overthink, not all, but a lot, do it because somewhere underneath the mental noise, there is a quiet belief that they are more likely to be rejected than not, that if someone really knew them, they'd leave, that the connection they feel is always more fragile than it appears, because they are, in some fundamental way, more difficult to love than other people, and the overthinking is partly an attempt to manage that. If you can see the rejection coming, you can prepare. If you can find the evidence early, you're not naive. If you hold back a little, you're protected. But also, and this is the part that's harder to say, the overthinking feeds that belief. Because when you're constantly generating worst case scenarios, constantly looking for the signs of leaving, constantly preparing for the end, you are practicing the belief that the end is inevitable. You are rehearsing it. You are making it more real in your body and your nervous system every single time you run the simulation. The mind is very literal about what it practices. If you practice being rejected, your brain gets better at feeling rejected. If you spend enough time preparing for loss, your nervous system stops distinguishing between the preparation and the actual thing. You end up carrying the emotional weight of a loss that hasn't happened. And you do that every day, for weeks, months, years. And then people ask why you seem tired. So what do you do with it? I'm not going to pretend I have the full answer. I don't think the full answer exists in a way that can be written down and handed to you, but I do think there are some true things worth saying. The first one is, your thoughts are not facts. I know that sounds like something on a motivational poster, and I'm sorry about that because it's actually a profound and difficult thing to practice. Your mind produces thoughts the way your body produces heat, constantly, automatically, without your permission. And not all of those thoughts are accurate. Not all of those thoughts deserve to be believed. The feeling of certainty that your brain attaches to its worst case scenarios is not evidence that those scenarios are real. It's just evidence that your brain is very good at its job. The second one is, presence is the antidote, and presence is hard. Because presence means actually being in the moment you're in, not the moment your brain has already moved to. It means feeling the good thing while it's happening, instead of scanning it for the reasons it won't last. It means trusting, not blindly, not naively, but with the actual evidence in front of you, that right now, things are okay. Letting okay be okay without immediately upgrading it to a threat. The third one, and this is the one that took me the longest, is that you have to grieve the version of safety that overthinking promises. Because it does promise something. It promises that if you think hard enough, prepare enough, stay alert enough, you will be protected. You will not be caught off guard. You will not be hurt in the ways you've been hurt before. That promise is a lie, but it's a comforting lie. And giving it up means accepting that you cannot think your way to safety in relationships. You cannot prepare your way out of vulnerability. The only way through is actually through, open, present, willing to be surprised by both the good and the bad. That is terrifying if you are someone who has been hurt, and most of the people reading this have been hurt. But the alternative, staying inside the machine, living in the pre-lived loss, holding yourself back from the full experience of being alive with another person, that's not safety. That's just a slower kind of missing out. Your mind gets the best of you because it loves you in its way. It is trying to protect you. It learned something once about how the world works, and it has been faithfully applying that lesson ever since. Even when the lesson no longer applies, even when the environment changed and the people changed and you changed, it doesn't know it's out of date. It just keeps running the old program, trying to keep you safe, costing you peace. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not fundamentally harder to love than other people. You are someone whose brain learned to be very careful, and that carefulness served a purpose once, and now it's costing you more than it's protecting you. And the work, the long, uncomfortable, ongoing, nonlinear work, is teaching it that it's okay to put the armor down. Not all the way, not all at once, just enough Just enough to let something real get in. Just enough to be here, actually here, in the life you're living instead of the one your mind keeps rehearsing. That's the whole thing, that's all of it. Let yourself be here.